All right, welcome back to the channel. We are going to be painting a snowy owl today. Let's get to it.
So this is going to be really fun today because we are going to entirely focus on one animal. We are just going to do this entire video on this one very small section of the mural that took me about an hour and a half to paint in real time. So right now we're blocking in the colors and we're going to show you our paint palette now.
Okay, so we are under painting. So we are trying to get some of the basic shadows in the different wings and the chest feathers. You can see where the tail feathers are going to end here. And then we have left some of the shadow around the beak, which is really fun, and spaces for the eyes. So basically at this point, I am using black, a brown that I had mixed left over from the trees, a blue that I had mixed from, I don't know, somewhere, some sky or water down there. And then we also have part of our sunset color. This was like the orange that we used for it. So I'm kind of using this as like a little bit of like a warmer tone and a little bit of a cooler tone in our white. So I always save little bits of the paint colors that I have mixed left over, and I find it just really speeds up the process. So that's a quick tip. But yeah, so right now we are mixing a kind of cool gray and a kind of like a warmer gray as well with the brown, and using that as the underpainting.
You want to start with the underpainting with the darkest colors. And right now we're doing that with a very dark navy blue, and we also have a kind of more dark warm orange color. It's tricky with white animals because you have to be able to paint the details and have the highlights be almost pure white. So it means everything else can't be like white. So you have to try and make it interesting so it's not just different shades of gray. So that's where you want to add your warmer and cooler tones of white to really add color to a uncolorful object, because their feathers are reflecting a lot of, you know, colors in the environment. The blue could be from the sky. There's warmer colors reflecting off of the bark of the tree maybe. Everything is kind of casting all of this different interplay of light on your subject. And our job as artists is to try and capture that. So when I'm painting here, this is about at 2 times the footage. I was going to do this entire video in real-time footage. I didn't think anybody would really want to sit here for the full hour and a half that it took me to paint this in fully real time. So I figured 2 times speed is kind of enough that I get to talk about all the decisions that went into every single step of the way. And you can kind of get a more realistic gauge for how the details are created in a very slow manner, but it's not too slow that, you know, otherwise it would just be too slow. So at this point, we are taking our white color, and it's a bit of an off-white. It's hard to see, but it's not quite pure white yet. And I'm just kind of doing broad strokes in the loose placement of the different feathers. So right now I'm trying to look at the owl picture and see what is the direction of this feather, how wide is it, and what is the main length for the different areas. If this was something I was doing in my studio for a wildlife art painting on canvas of an animal, I actually go and individually count the number of feathers on its chest, and I count the number of feathers in the wing, how big they are, and really trying to make it as accurate to the species as possible. When I'm doing this as part of a mural project, time is such, you know, time is the name of the game for this. So we're really just estimating the places and trying to get it as close as possible from a kind of quick passing glance, which is going to be enough for this to really pop out of the mural. The other thing I'm well aware of with this animal is that the eyes are going to be the thing that pops the most of this owl. So when we're into all these other feather details, they're, you know, we're going to pay a lot of attention to them, but the main things that are going to pop on the snowy owl is going to be the black tips of the feather and the eyes and the beak of the owl. So with that in mind, those are the main features that I'm going to spend the most time on when we're trying to capture this and people be able to recognize the species at a quick glance. I'm also, using some of the white right now as quick highlights on some of the trees, just to kind of make sure that it's going to match the rest of the scene and kind of bring everything together. But other than that slight distraction, we are just almost finished blocking in the big feathers here, and we're going to show you the up close view of the brush I'm using.
Okay, so now we've started doing some of the highlight feathers, and we were using a 3/4 filbert. It's in water, but this guy, 3/4 inch filbert. Now we are going to be switching back to our really thin liner brush. On this concrete stuff, this is kind of the only thing that I found can get some of the details in, and especially because we're outside and our paint's drying quick, it's pretty thick paint. So yeah, so we're gonna use the liner brush next.
The reason I mentioned the thickness or viscosity of the paint and its drying is because liner brushes hold a lot of paint in their length. It's kind of deceiving. Liner brushes can really hold paint a lot easier than shorter brushes that are the same width, so I think they work really good for an outside environment like this. I'm using a quite large liner brush. You could go bigger. The other reason why I like the liner brush is for smaller animals like this. I'm really trying to paint every single little, crack in the concrete. You can see in comparison with the tree beside it, I kind of left that texture where, there's shadow cracks of all the holes in the trees, and I wasn't really focused on getting into every single one of those cracks with the bark colors. Whereas when I'm doing the owl, I don't want any of those kind of dots to really mess up the feather pattern, because it's a bit more detailed and it's a bit of a smaller, details that we're going for to capture. So at first I was going in with white and just filling in some holes of the concrete. Now I'm going in with a darker color and trying to just get some of the tips of the feathers that are going to be a bit dark. So I believe I have a very, kind of like a orange gray white that I'm painting with currently. And we're trying to get some of the shape of the feathers and the pattern in around its chest feathers. What I'm thinking when I'm doing this is just what area of the bird is the furthest behind. I know there's lots of people that paint a wing, right to left, and that's how their mind works, and they do all of the different layers of it at that time. I've always kind of painted my wildlife art so far as trying to get the whole animal to progress at around the same time. So you can see I kind of am going in with a darker color now and just adding some of those main landmark details that I can see. I'm starting with the chest of the bird because I thought it was more central and easiest to work with. You could really start anywhere though. And I'm trying to distinguish between the chest feathers and the far wing that you can kind of see wrapping around our owl. The other thing that's interesting in this is to get that the bird is turned to kind of look over its shoulder at the rest of the mural. And the base shape of the feathers is these tiny little V's that are pointing different directions. I also like painting the entire animal at once because I don't really have to clean off my brush as much. I'm going in and just using all of these darker details right now, and then I'll go back in with white for a while and do that and kind of bounce between these two techniques to get all of the detail in. We're using the map of feathers that I created with those broad, quick white strokes to try and be a guide for our placement of these darker markings. And this is a really handy tip because you can go back and add different highlights to really make certain feathers pop out. And we can change their placement here. You can see there's a few more V's marking the end of feathers than I do have actual feathers painted thus far in that first layer that we did. But the beauty of using a acrylic-based paint like this is that we're able to paint over it, and as long as we kind of get those quick details in, we can go back with the highlight color again, the white, and really kind of make certain feathers stand out. I'm also planning at the end to add the wispy bits of the feather, the bit of the down that's kind of poking out between feathers. So I'm really trying to be conscious of keeping the owl kind of dark so that those highlight white feathers are going to be able to pop and add some definition and roundness to our owl. Some of these marks on the end of the wings are just dots. Some are V's, some are kind of poking out between other feathers. And it's just a matter for painting animals of looking at your reference photo and trying to be a gauge of where they are. It was particularly windy this day, so you can see I'm spending a lot of time mixing paint. I may cut some of that footage out just to make it a bit more entertaining to see because the camera's not moving to show it. But we're mixing different colors. Now we're going in with a blue-gray tone and adding in some more of the definition of the feathers. So there are certain areas of the owl that are darker to make those other feathers, like particularly in the wing, really pop out. So I'm using this dark gray-blue color to add definition to the feathers and make them stand out a little bit more. It's really tricky when you're painting white things to find the balance between how dark do you go in those shadowed areas, and I'm having to exaggerate it a little bit more than I thought I would have to do in this painting on concrete compared to the reference image. So the liner brush is great. You can see I'm just kind of going in and creating a bit of a outline for some of the feathers of the wings. I was going to go in and add all those, dark V tips, add the brown wing tips, but I was having trouble getting lost in some of the feathers. So now I've gone and sketched in what they're gonna look like with the dark blue color. And that'll be a little bit easier than repainting over them once I get the right placement again. Now with white, you can see I'm bringing in the top wing feathers down a little bit. This is just to better match the image. And I'm also holding up the painting and trying to gauge how far the feathers are going from this. This time with painting the snowy owl, it's about a 1-to-1 ratio from my reference image to what I was putting on the wall, which is really handy because you can hold them both right beside each other and it's less mental math to do to scale something up or down. And now I'm creating that nice fluffy down of its chest. The feathers at the face of the owl are so small, I'm just using the liner brush for it. It's kind of a bit more like what I would do for fur, but the feathers are so small that you're not really able to see the rounder shape of them. So that's pretty good to get some of the feathers on the forehead, and the whole face of the owl is going to really pop as soon as we get the eyes and nose in. Now we're back with the dark brown doing some of the tips of the feathers on the bottom of the wing. Snowy owls and any animal that has spots or a certain type of pattern to it can really be an effective way to cheat at what the texture of the animal looks like. We don't have to sit there and define every single individual white feather because we have this dark feature of each feather that's going to really make the animal stand out and add detail where it's actually quite simple to paint it. So as long as you take a lot of time, and I'm looking at the reference image between every single individual one of these V shapes or W shapes of the feathers I'm doing and trying to get their placement pretty accurate the first time. So I'm counting how many V's there are along each line of the feathers. And, it's not going to be a perfect representation for the image, but it's pretty close. And doing this slowly once over an hour to get these, 50 or so markings in the painting is going to really help the realism of the owl. Now with the light brown, I'm going in and just adding some of the finer details and shading because it is a bit of a gradient to the V. So I'm adding this light brown in around the darker V's just to kind of help it blend in a little bit more. And the blending of this adds a bit of complexity as well. Now with the liner brush, we're adding some more of the fluffy feathers around its back and its tail. And this is going to really help get the whole outline of the bird really stand out against the darker snow behind it. We're also working on defining its legs a bit on the tree branch. And we're using this white highlight color to just kind of really accentuate the highlights in around its face as well. So we're trying to get the entire outline of the owl pretty accurate to the image at this point. It's easy to overdo it with white. I was kind of putting a little bit on and then stepping back and making sure I haven't lost too much of that rich shadow color that we originally developed as the background to our owl. So it's just a matter of, you can always add more. It's harder to take away necessarily. So I wanted to try and keep that definition of individual feathers and just be very selective with where I'm putting the brightest white. Now we're going back in and adding the dark V's again to the center wing portion. You can kind of see I'm doing this until I get kind of mentally a bit bored with the redundancy of doing all these little V's of feather details, and then I'll go back and zoom out on the whole owl, do a few touch-ups everywhere to bring the whole painting of the owl forward, and then I'll go back to these kind of more monotonous details that kind of take a little bit of time and can be slightly mentally numbing when you do it over and over again. It's always fun to jump around a painting a bit, I find. And I'm doing some of these features with a even darker brown, almost black, just to really highlight some of these V's. And now we're on to the claws of the feet of the owl. So we're really trying to make sure we get the arching shape and the grasping of the tree branch. This is a bit unique because in my reference image, it's not quite on a branch like the one that we have painted in our mural. So we're doing a little bit of guesstimating of where exactly these placements are going to be. And the claws are interesting because they have a nice highlight sheen on part of it, and otherwise are quite dark, and that's what the darkness is what makes them really stand out from the owl's body. So it's interesting to get the highlight on the edge of it without it getting lost and looking very small. So it took a little bit of playing around with the claws to kind of get that figured out. And now we're adding more of the fluff with the pure white. And we are getting close to wrapping up the body of this owl, and we're going to go in and zoom in on the face a bit and do some of the facial details and features. One of the number one things I get asked when I'm painting on the street is how long this is taking me. So I thought it would be really interesting to see footage that's just sped up 2 times, and you can kind of get a more realistic gauge for how quickly I'm painting it. I have cut out probably about 3-4 minutes of different sections where I'm talking to somebody on the street that's come up and inquired about the artwork, or I'm just sitting there looking at the project. Those kind of areas of time where you're not brushed to canvas may seem unproductive, but the wheels of your mind are always turning and processing different details and where you want to modify it and where you want to expand on it to get different features really captured. So a very important part of being an artist in general is stepping back and looking at your work. And even though I cut out that bit of the footage, know that it's happening. And we're going to go back in for a real-time update about now.
Okay, and now we are going to be working on the eyes of the owls. So we're going to go into the eyes and the beak and fill in those details. And yeah, all of this stuff it looks kind of rough from when you're close up, but as soon as you stand back 5 feet, which is basically what the mural's meant to be, all of this stuff looks really good. So this is about as much detail as we can get on the body for concrete. And then basically we're just trying to make the impression of everything. So we're gonna go in and start working on the face details next.
Right now, baby Sidon, when I'm editing this, is asleep in his crib. We got a crib nap. He's about 2 months old. And it's just so funny for me editing now to look back at the footage where I am just progressively getting more and more pregnant throughout this entire project, because I could only work on this mural for probably 2 days of the week for about 3 months. It was so weather dependent. We had a lot of heat spells that I couldn't really paint in, where it was 35 plus in temperature. And we also had tons of rain in May and June. So it was really weather dependent being able to work on this. But yeah, so I wanted to include this footage because it's interesting seeing the scale of the owl in with the rest of the mural. There's going to be a few more animals that get included in this winter forest section, but you can really see the detail and kind of the impression of the wing and the legs and the head of the owl as it's kind of looking over its shoulder, and kind of get an idea of how much it's standing out or blending into its surroundings. Snowy owls are really meant to blend into their winter environment, and they do a good job of it. So I'm using the tree behind it to really highlight the one edge of its body to add some contrast so that it's able to be seen. At the same time, I wanted to kind of, draw people's attention to how well they are able to blend into their winter environments. And I did that on the left side of its body, where you can really see the background of the forest and the snow. So I used the subtle highlight and shadow of the snow to kind of create a bit of contrast, so you don't lose the definition of its, left side of its body here, but you're able to kind of, see that how much the animal really is thriving in that environment. And I thought, as a biologist, that it was a cool thing to try and capture in the placement of this animal. So I'm really just adding the darker colors of its eyes right now, just kind of focusing on the shape of the eyes and of the beak. And we're going to zoom in and get some up close footage here, so you're not missing too much at this point. I wish I got more of the face in real-time footage as well. It was kind of an accident that I got so much of the wing footage in it. I think I had meant it to be a time-lapse and it ended up recording in real-time footage. But anyway, this is the shape of the face. It's going to be a bit choppy, so we can talk about the details. Basically, I'm adding in some of the highlight feathers and trying to get the shape of the beak, and then I'm going in with orange and white to try and get the eyes of our owl. So I'm playing around with some of the highlight colors around the face and the feathers that overlap the eyes. I'm also playing around with the different shadow colors from the lid of the eye. So you can see the bottom ridge of the eye is the most yellow and the brightest. That's kind of casting the light from the surface downwards. And also with snowy owls, they have these black feathers kind of outlining their eyes, almost like they have eyeliner on. So I use the liner brush really thinly to get that line. And then I use the white and orange yellow to kind of correct it from the inside and the outside of the eye to get that line really, really nice and thin. At this point, I'm doing really little lines with the liner brush on the eye from the iris outwards with white, and trying to get some of that kind of depth to their eye. As with all eyes, as soon as you add the white glint, it really brings the whole thing to life. And I'm really trying to capture the lightness of the bottom portion of the eye and to the left as well. And it's hard to paint and hold the camera really close at the same time without it being very shaky. So we did this with a stationary camera. This was about as close as I could get. And now we're going to take a up close zoomed look at the owl.
All right, and this is the final look at the eyes of the snowy owl. And then you can see all the feather details. So it looks pretty good for being on concrete at this angle. And then especially when you go pretty far back. Now we're about 5 feet away and it's looking pretty sharp, if I do say so myself. So yeah, so we've done the snowy owl. Now we're gonna add a fox here and a groundhog here, as it is Wyerton. But otherwise, today's progress of doing all the snow and the snowy owl has been a pretty good day. So here we go.
And this is going to conclude our video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. We are going to end with some clips from next week's video where we continue painting the mural. So I hope you enjoy this sneak peek footage and hit the subscribe button so you don't miss the video next week. We'll see you soon.